Have you ever looked at the records of the past and felt a cold prickle of unease? Not because of the violence, but because the facts simply refuse to fit the timeline. In the quiet archives of Greene County, Ohio, rests one such record. It details the official death of a man named Caesar Bowen in 1888. The entry is unsettlingly precise. Caesar's documented age at death was 126 years old. This places his birth year as 1762, a time when King George III reigned in Ohio was merely unmapped wilderness. This isn't just a claim of extreme longevity. It's a profound historical anomaly that scholars have preferred to ignore for over a century. Why the discomfort? 7 different notarized affidavits, signed by prominent citizens, swore they had known Caesar since their own childhoods, each confirming he already looked incredibly ancient even then. The county coroner, who conducted the examination, noted dental wear and bone density patterns he called inconsistent with any living person I have observed. Yet, he still refused to dispute the official age. The implication was simply too unsettling. But the real mystery wasn't just his age. It was what they discovered inside Caesar's remote cabin after his passing. A collection of 63 leather-bound journals, written in 3 distinctly different handwriting styles, all purportedly his own, suggested a life far stranger than simple long age. These journals contained secrets too dark, too detailed, and too long-lived for one man to hold. Before we delve into the story of Caesar Bowen and the impossible breadth of his existence, let us know where you're tuning in from across the United States. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories like Caesar's deserve to be dragged out of the shadows and remembered. The question of how one man could genuinely witness the birth of a nation, the chilling rise and fall of American slavery, and the eventual dawn of the industrial age requires us to first set the scene of his supposed final years. Greene County, Ohio, in the 1880s, was a community built on modest prosperity and a fierce abolitionist heritage. Xenia, the county seat, was rebuilding, energized by the railroad. It was a place where people boasted of the underground railroad routes that once crisscrossed their farmlands. Caesar Bowen lived just 2 miles outside this progressive town, in a structure that was, itself, an artifact. The cabin was agreed by locals to be at least 60 years old, its hand-hewn logs darkened and near-black. The old man was a familiar, almost ghost-like figure in Xenia. Walking with a gnarled hickory cane he claimed to have cut in 1799. He stood barely 5 feet tall, his frame so bent that he seemed perpetually on the verge of collapsing. His skin was like heavily cracked, old leather, lined with suffering. Yet everyone who encountered Caesar made the same comment. His eyes, they were unnervingly clear, a pale brown like creek water over sand, focusing with an intensity that made strong, grown men look away. He earned his sparse living mending harnesses and tools, his arthritic hands moving with a surprising, practiced precision that hinted at decades of unseen labor. He spoke rarely, and his voice was a dry whisper. When he did speak, his language carried peculiar, forgotten archaisms, phrases that belonged to the 18th century, not the 19th. For 3 years, the town physician, Dr. Harold Sutton, tried to properly examine Caesar. Dr. Sutton was medically stumped. The man's vitals are impossible, he confessed in 1887. His pulse is barely 40 beats per minute. His respiratory rate suggests deep sleep, yet he is fully conscious. I've searched every medical text. There is no precedent. The doctor's confusion was compounded by the preserved county records. He remembered winters so cold, the trees splintered, and summers so hot, the sky bled red from endless forest fires. In 1885, he gave a rare extensive interview to a young reporter named Thomas Fletcher from the Xenia Gazette. "I was born on a tobacco farm in Tidewater, Virginia," Caesar recounted. "My mother died the same year. Fever took her. My father was sold away before I could walk. The master was Josiah Warren. I was the smallest, the weakest. They didn't think I'd survive my first winter. Old songs from Africa that none of us knew the meaning of anymore. But we sang them because our mothers had sung them, and I remember being hungry, always hungry. You must have witnessed tremendous changes, Fletcher prompted, focusing on the historical gravity, the revolution, the formation of the country, the expansion west. Caesar's unnervingly clear eyes focused on a distant point. I saw empires fall and rise, he whispered. I saw slavery spread like a sickness across this land, and I saw it finally die. Yet, the full, untouched interview remained in the reporter's private files, a crucial piece of evidence for what was to come. In the spring of 1887, Caesar began to visibly decline. He moved with difficulty and appeared in Xenia less and less. Despite Caesar's protests, no physician has ever done me good, and I suspect none ever will. Dr. Harold Sutton began making house calls, driven by a scientific compulsion he couldn't ignore. The next day, the doctor and the neighbor found Caesar in the same chair, alive and responsive, but completely mute. Dr. Sutton's examination revealed no physical damage. It was as if Caesar had simply chosen silence. But why would a man who has survived for so long suddenly decide to lock himself in silence? The doctor wondered in his notes. Over the following weeks, Caesar's deterioration took an alarming turn. He ate mechanically, never left his chair, and began suffering from what Dr. Sutton termed episodes of temporal confusion. He would stare intensely at a blank wall until, when finally roused, his expression would momentarily shift to one of such profound terror that the doctor instinctively Local children began to whisper of his silent, moving lips and a shadow that felt wrong, saying the old man was counting down to some unseen conclusion. The whispers grew louder when a neighbor reported hearing multiple voices singing in harmony from the cabin at night, in a language she didn't recognize. The crisis point arrived on a freezing night in January 1888, when Samuel Pritchard was awakened by Caesar pounding on his door, barefoot, in the snow. Caesar collapsed before he could speak. For 3 days, the man, who was perhaps 126 years old, burned with a consuming fever. He thrashed in delirium, calling out names that were strangers to those present. Abigail Jonas Sepia de Leon. In one moment of chilling clarity, he looked past the ceiling and whispered, "Tell them I tried. Tell them it was never supposed to be this long." On the 4th day, the fever broke. Caesar opened his eyes, looked straight at Dr. Sutton, and spoke his first words in 3 months. "How many years has it been?" "Since what?" the doctor asked, gently. "Since I was young," Caesar whispered, before falling into an unnaturally deep sleep. He began speaking sporadically after that, in brief sentences, disconnected from reality. Dr. Sutton meticulously recorded every word, searching for a pattern. It was in early February 1888 that Caesar said something that irrevocably altered the doctor's investigation. I should have died with the others. On the crossing, that's when it should have ended. What crossing? The doctor asked, barely breathing. The middle passage, Caesar replied, barely audible. But I was born here, born in Virginia. I never made that crossing. So why do I remember it? Why do I remember the hold of the ship, the smell of sickness and death, the chains cutting into my ankles? Why do I remember Africa? Dr. Sutton, I've never been to Africa. The doctor felt a cold dread. He suggested they were, perhaps, stories passed down. No, Caesar insisted, his unnervingly clear eyes fixing on the doctor with sudden intensity. These are my memories, or someone's memories. I carry them like I carry my own. I remember things that happened before I was born. I remember dying, Dr. Sutton, multiple times in different ways. And yet here I am, still breathing, still remembering, accumulating years and memories that don't belong to me. Dismissing this as fever-induced delusion was the medical protocol, yet Dr. Sutton found himself asking, "What do you think's happening to you?" "I think," Caesar said slowly, "that I am carrying the weight of more than one life. I think somehow, in ways I cannot explain, the memories and years of others have been added to my own. I think I have lived long enough to know that Goddess justice sometimes manifests in ways we cannot comprehend, and I think I am both blessed and cursed to bear witness, compelled by an almost scientific obsession." Dr. Sutton returned frequently. Caesar spoke more now than he had in years, detailing life on 3 different Virginia plantations, though records confirmed he'd only been owned by 2 families. He recounted events from the Revolutionary War and the burning of Washington in 1814 with the chilling specificity of a living observer. "I was in the field when I heard," he recalled, "about the Capitol's destruction. The overseer came running, shouting that the British had taken the Capitol. I remember thinking, this is what empires do to each other. They destroy the symbols of power, but they forget that the real power lies in the people who plant the tobacco, who build the buildings, who create the wealth." Dr. Sutton faithfully recorded everything. He tried to disprove Caesar's claims, cross-referencing them with historical records, but he found no inconsistencies. Everything Caesar described that could be verified matched historical facts. Even more disturbing, Caesar occasionally mentioned minor, obscure incidents that the doctor could only confirm by tracking down long documents or interviewing very elderly residents. "I watched a man named Thomas Garrett help over 2,000 slaves escape to freedom," Caesar said one afternoon. "This was in Delaware years ago. He was prosecuted, fined everything he owned, and he just kept doing it. The judge told him he hoped the fine would teach him a lesson. And Garrett said, 'Judge, they hasn't left me $1, but I wish to say to they and to all in this courtroom that if anyone knows of a fugitive who wants a shelter and a friend, send him to Thomas Garrett and he will befriend him.' Do you know what courage like that costs, Doctor? True courage, not the kind sung about in ballads, but the kind that makes you a criminal in service of justice." Dr. Sutton was a man of science, but he couldn't deny the historical accuracy of Caesar's recollections, including the specific details about the famous abolitionist Thomas Garrett. How Caesar knew such precise court testimony, having supposedly not left Ohio since 1826, defied all rational explanation. As winter gave way to early spring, Caesar's physical form withered, yet his mind became unnaturally sharp. He began requesting specific items from Zinnia: newspapers, almanacs, and maps. He studied them with an intense, fierce concentrian. "What are you looking for?" Dr. Sutton finally asked. "I'm trying to determine when," Caesar replied, his eyes distant. "I've felt it approaching for months now. Time is finally catching up to me. All those borrowed years, all those memories that don't belong to me, they're coming due. I need to know when it will happen so I can prepare." "Prepare for what?" "For settling the account," Caesar said simply. "For returning what was never truly mine." The crucial breakthrough arrived in March 18 with the return of Thomas Fletcher, the reporter who had first interviewed Caesar. Fletcher brought with him an unexpected collection: 3 letters from readers who had responded to his original article. And these letters were different. The letters provided impossible confirmation. Victoria Ash, Virginia. Her grandfather remembered a slave named Caesar in the 1780s and 90s who was uncanny in his knowledge, predicting weather and harvests. He spoke as if he'd read books. Those slaves were forbidden to read. Her grandfather felt relieved when the slave was sold in 1795, as if a presence that didn't quite fit the natural order had been removed. Reverend Josiah Cruthers. Delaware. He recalled a 90-year-old parishioner in 1850, deliriously confessing that he needed to make it right with Caesar, a slave who had run away from his Virginia farm in 1808. Dr. Edmund Thorne, Pennsylvania. He discovered testimony from an 1823 Underground Railroad conductor named Ruth Ames. She had helped a fugitive named Caesar, who appeared ancient and spoke with a refined diction that made her doubt he was a slave. When asked his age, he told her he was 61 years, though I feel as if I've lived 3 lifetimes. Fletcher spread these documents on the cabin table. Caesar looked at them, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the paper. I remember Victorious's grandfather, Thomas Ashford, he said quietly. Curious boy. I knew when frost would come early because I remembered I had already seen 60 growing seasons by then, though my body had only seen perhaps 20. He pointed to the second letter. Benjamin Morton. I ran from his farm in 1808, crossed the Potomac on a stolen boat. I didn't drown, though perhaps that would have been a mercy. Morton was a cruel man en route. Ames, the Quaker conductor, a saint, Caesar stated with feeling. She risked everything. She did ask my age, and I told her the truth as I understood it then. 61 years of memories. He gazed at his gnarled hands. My body ages, yes, but not at the rate it should. Time passes through me differently. Dr. Sutton leaned in, his voice urgent. Caesar, I need you to be honest. Do you believe you have actually, physically existed for 126 years? Caesar was quiet, his eyes distant. I believe I have existed for 126 years. Whether I've lived them is a different question. To live is to experience joy. I have experienced mostly suffering, as far it's possible. I have theories, Doctor, but no certainty. Fletcher was eager. What are your theories? Caesar's expression darkened. There was a woman. When I was very young, perhaps 10 years old, she was ancient, brought over on the slave ships. She knew things, herbs, rhythms of nature that seemed almost mystical. She took an interest in me because I was weak, unlikely to survive. One night, she performed some kind of ritual, he continued. I don't remember the details clearly. My mind refuses to retain them, but I remember her words. You will carry the weight of your people. You will remember what should be forgotten. You will witness the suffering and the eventual freedom, and you will bear testimony. A curse. Dr. Sutton asked, chilled, or a blessing, Caesar replied, depending on how you measure such things. She died 3 days later, and I began to notice differences. I healed from injuries that should have killed me. I survived diseases that decimated entire slave quarters, and I started remembering things I shouldn't have been able to remember. Events I never witnessed, people I never met, but somehow their experiences became part of my memory, as if I'd absorbed them. Fletcher paused, pencil suspended. You're suggesting that through some African practice, she made you immortal. Not immortal, Caesar corrected. I age. I feel pain. I grow weaker, but the process is extended, drawn out far beyond its natural span. I believe I've somehow absorbed the experiences of other slaves I encountered whose suffering and stories became part of my own recall. I became a living archive, carrying the testimonies of people who otherwise would have left no record. The two men exchanged stunned glances. The journals, Dr. Sutton suddenly realized. Samuel Pritchard mentioned seeing 63 journals written in different hands. 3 hands, Caesar clarified. Mine as it was 50 years ago, mine as it was 20 years ago, and mine as it is now. The handwriting changes as age claims my fingers, but the words remain constant. I've been documenting everything, every memory, every story, every witness I've carried, because someday, when this is finally over, Someone needs to know. Someone needs to remember that we were here, that we suffered, that we survived, and that our stories matter. The existence of the journals transformed the investigation from a curious inquiry into urgent, critical documentation. Sensing his time was short, Caesar finally allowed Dr. Sutton and Fletcher to examine the volumes. The 63 journals were unlike anything they had ever encountered. They were a testament to centuries of silent suffering, written on every surface imaginable. Vellum, rough pulp, birch bark, and the backs of discarded papers. The earliest entries were dated 1795. The handwriting in those first volumes was strikingly elegant, educated, and precise, an impossible accomplishment for a slave with no formal education. I taught myself, Caesar explained. Stole a primer from the master's son, practiced in secret. It took 3 years before I could form proper letters. Worth every risk. Though, once you can read and write, they can take everything else from you, but they can't take your thoughts. The content was even more harrowing. Caesar had meticulously documented the experiences of dozens of other slaves, ensuring their stories would survive. June 12, 1803. Spoke today with Lydia, age approximately 40, who was separated from her 3 children when her master sold them to Louisiana. She described the morning they were taken, how the youngest clung to her skirts. I will carry this story forward so that someone someday knows that Lydia existed, that she loved, that she suffered, and that she endured. He described violence with clinical detachment, making it more terrifying, and documented the devastating heartbreak of family separations. Why did you take on this burden? Fletcher asked, his voice tight. Because no one else could, Caesar said simply. Slaves couldn't write their own stories. White people wouldn't document these experiences truthfully. I realized I'd been given a terrible gift. The time to witness, the ability to record, and the necessity to remember. How could I not use it? But it was the later journals, from the 1840s onward, that truly terrified Dr. Sutton. The handwriting was shakier, and the content had shifted to memories Caesar explicitly stated were not his own. November 3rd, 1847. I remember a ship. I have never been on a ship, yet I remember this one with absolute clarity. The hold is dark, airless, packed with bodies, ... I say we, though this is not my memory. It belongs to someone else. The smell is beyond description. Human waste, vomit, rotting flesh. Fear itself has a smell in that hold. People die around him, and their bodies remain chained to the living 4 days. This is not my memory, yet I carry it now. You think I'm insane? The old man said flatly, seeing the shock in the doctor's eyes. I think, Dr. Sutton replied carefully, that you have experienced something beyond normal human existence. It's more than belief, Caesar insisted. I can describe the exact pattern of scars on the back of a man named Joshua, whose beating I somehow remember as if I'd felt it myself. I carry the weight of hundreds of lives, their joys, their sorrows, their years of torment. And now, as I approach the end, I feel them gathering. All those memories, all those people pressing close, waiting. Waiting for what? Fletcher asked. For the final accounting, Caesar said, his voice dropping. I can feel all those borrowed years pulling back like a debt being called in. Every day I feel heavier, more tired. It is as if every year I've lived beyond my natural span is now demanding its due all at once. What followed in the final months of Caesar's life challenged the boundaries between the possible and the inexplicable. Dr. Sutton and Fletcher worked frantically, documenting dozens of historical verifications events, places, and people. Caesar described that matched, confirmed records, but verification was an explanation. Martha Hoot, the neighboring widow who began assisting with his care, was the first to notice the physical changes in early May. His skin, she told Dr. Sutton, her voice trembling. It's becoming thinner, almost translucent. I can see the veins beneath the pattern of bones, and his eyes. They're turning almost gray, like old glass. Caesar was visibly shrinking, as if his very substance was being consumed. Hollow, Caesar whispered when asked how he felt, like something is being drawn out of me. Not painfully, but steadily. I can feel myself becoming less solid, less present. It's as if I'm slowly translating from flesh into something else. Memory, perhaps, or pure witness, unbound by physical form. On May 3rd, 1888, the situation intensified dramatically. Dr. Sutton arrived to find Caesar rigid in his chair, his eyes wide but unfocused, gasping for breath. "What's happening?" Sutton asked, urgently. "They're here," Caesar whispered, his voice seeming to echo strangely in the small cabin. "All of them, every person whose story I carried, every memory I absorbed, they're all here surrounding me, and they want their time back." Dr. Sutton saw nothing, but he could not dismiss the terror in Caesar's eyes. "Describe it," he urged. "I'm remembering everything at once." Caesar's voice was strained, words tumbling over each other. "Lydia, whose children were sold. I feel her grief as if it's happening now. Joshua, who was beaten for learning to read. I feel the lash on my back. Sarah, who poisoned herself. I taste the bitter herbs on my tongue. I can't separate my own experiences from theirs anymore. I don't know which memories belong to me and which I've borrowed. I don't know who I am beneath all these accumulated years." The doctor was documenting a crisis that existed outside the framework of medical science, but the physical reality was undeniable. Caesar was facing his final reckoning. "Try to focus on my voice," Dr. Sutton urged Caesar, attempting to anchor the old man. "But that's just it," Caesar whispered, and his voice suddenly shifted. It became higher, softer, and unmistakably feminine. "This moment isn't just one moment. It's every moment I've carried. I am Caesar, yes, but I'm also Lydia. I'm Joshua. I'm Sarah. I'm the woman who performed the ritual. I'm the child I was. I'm the old man I've become. I'm all of them all at once." Dr. Sutton watched in stunned disbelief as Caesar began to cycle through different personas. The voice shifted mid-sentence, becoming a deeper, rougher tone with a distinct accent, only to be replaced seconds later by another. This phenomenon intensified over the next 3 days. Caesar cycled through dozens of identities. He spoke in the specific Gula dialect of the Georgia coast, the clipped tones of Maryland's eastern shore, and the softer drawl of Virginia type. He responded to different names and described scenes from multiple, simultaneous perspectives. "I'm in the tobacco field. The sun is burning my back. I'm 12 years old," he'd say in a child's voice, before seamlessly shifting. "I'm in the kitchen house. My hands are scarred from years of handling hot pots. I'm watching the master's children play." Dr. Sutton documented every syllable. Yet privately, he wrestled with his scientific training. He was witnessing something that exceeded all medical and psychological explanation. He noted in his personal journal, "If Caesar truly has carried forward the memories and experiences of others, what happens when that vessel can no longer contain them? Is this not the cessation of one life, but the dispersal of many?" On May 6th, Caesar had a period of chilling clarity, weak yet steady. He apologized for the disturbing sight they had witnessed. "I need you to understand what's happening," he told them. "I need you to document it, because this dispersal of accumulated identity, it may be important." He explained that the old woman's ritual was an attempt to preserve the stories, the testimonies of suffering and resistance. She chose him, the weakest child, to be the repository. "I became a living archive," he said, and with each absorption, "Primera que..." In time, their remaining years added to mine, extending my life beyond its natural span. But now, the limits were reached. Those borrowed years, those accumulated memories, they're pulling back like a debt being called in. Each person whose story I carried is reclaiming their time, their separate existence. And as they do, I'm fragmenting. Imagine feeling your sense of self dissolving, he whispered. Imagine being unable to distinguish between your own childhood and another person's childhood. I'm becoming everyone I've ever carried, and in the process, I'm ceasing to be anyone at all. Fletcher asked if they could help. Caesar smiled gently. You're already doing it. You're bearing witness to my witness. The clarity was fleeting. By evening, he was fragmented again. On Maisia Tateashe, an impossible phenomenon began. Caesar started speaking in languages neither man recognized. The rhythms suggested West African origins, and his voice produced deep, resonant tones and high, keening wails that seemed impossible for his aged throat. The old songs, he murmured later, exhausted. The ones they sang on the ships, in the fields. I've been carrying them for so long. They want to be sung one last time before they're released. Over the following day, Caesar would occasionally break into these songs, sometimes alone, sometimes as if part of a chorus of invisible voices. Dr. Sutton, despite his training, found himself deeply moved, sensing the sound was not just a medical crisis, but a profound release of humanity persisting under conditions designed to crush it. On the night of May 8th, Caesar's crisis reached its terrifying peak. Samuel Pritchard burst into the boarding house, reporting screaming from the cabin. The three men ran to find every lamp unnaturally lit, the air charged with an unsettling energy. Caesar was standing in the middle of the room, though he had been too weak to stand for weeks. His arms were spread wide, his face tilted towards the ceiling, and he was speaking rapidly in an impossible chorus of sound multiple, overlapping voices and dialects emanating from a single throat. It was a cacophony of testimonies, prayers, sorrow, and defiance. Dr. Sutton recognized fragmented English words, possible West African terms, and others that defied all known identification. The man who had lived too long was finally beginning to shed the burden of his impossible existence. The polyphonic speech, the impossible chorus of voices, continued for several minutes, a violation of the natural order that made it difficult to remain in the cabin. "Don't touch him," Dr. Sutton commanded, instinctively recognizing that Caesar needed to complete whatever terrifying process was underway. Then, the chaotic sound abruptly ceased. The lamps flickered, and the oppressive, thick feeling in the air began to dissipate. Caesar slowly lowered his arms and looked directly at the three men. His expression was calm, almost suddenly completely at odds with the disturbing display they had just witnessed. "I understand now," he said, clearly, in his own distinct voice. "This was never about me living one impossibly long life. It was about me carrying forward the lives that were cut short, the stories that would have been forgotten. That woman, Amarachi, she didn't make me immortal. She made me a vessel." He explained that every slave he encountered who died too young, whose story would have perished with them, was somehow preserved within him. Their memories, their borrowed years, their witness. I became a living archive of suffering and survival. "That's not scientifically possible," Dr. Sutton said, his voice now hollow, the appeal to science crumbling after what he had seen. "Science doesn't yet understand consciousness or memory," Caesar replied, slowly moving back toward his chair. His movements were steadier now, as if a profound burden had been lifted. "You study the brain, Doctor, but can you tell me where a memory lives? Can you show me the physical location of identity? I know what I've experienced. I have carried forward the testimonies of hundreds of people, and now, finally, I can let them go." He settled into his chair with a deep, evident relief. "The ritual that bound them to me is complete. They've had their witness, their testimony has been preserved in the journals, and now they can release their hold on this world. And he paused, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "I can finally rest. The debt is settled." He continued softly, "The weight is lifting. I can feel all those borrowed years releasing their hold. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel light. I had forgotten what it felt like to be simply myself, to have memories that are only my own." "What does that mean, practically?" Fletcher asked. "It means," Caesar said gently, "that it's finally time for me to die. The borrowed years are returning to wherever such things return. The vessel has served its purpose. Now the vessel can break, and what it held can disperse." He thanked them for bearing witness to his witness. "The journals will tell the stories, but you can tell the truth of how much it costs to preserve them." Caesar Bowen lived for 7 more days after that night. They were days of gradual, peaceful decline, a stark contrast to the preceding crisis. Dr. Sutton noted that it was as if Caesar had already died in some essential way, and now his body was simply completing the formalities. The old man slept often, but when he was awake, he was remarkably lucid. He spoke about his life with a singular clarity, confirming that the fragmentation had truly ended. I was born in February, he told them. I remember being cold, always cold that first winter. My mother sang to me songs that came from a place she'd never seen, but somehow remembered. I think that's when it started, that understanding that memory could transcend individual experience. He spoke of Amarachi, the woman who performed the ritual. It meant God's grace in her language. She recognized something in me, some capacity to hold more than I should have been able to hold. So, she chose me for this burden, this blessing, this terrible gift of extended witness. He also spoke of the deep moral complexity of his situation. Was it right for Amarachi to make me a vessel without my consent? I was a child, but then I consider the alternative. Hundreds of stories lost forever, which is the greater wrong. I believe, Caesar concluded slowly, that the question itself is the answer. The fact that we can ask it, that we struggle with it, that's what matters. Slavery tried to reduce human beings to property. By preserving these stories, that was resistance, that was victory, even in the midst of profound loss. On May 14th, he asked to be moved outside. They carried him to a spot under an old oak tree. I had forgotten how beautiful the world could be when you were UN carrying the weight of so much sorrow, he said. His face turned toward the sun. It's extraordinary. Every leaf, every blade of grass. It's all so precious. Have you ever looked at the records of the past and felt a cold prickle of unease? Not because of the violence, but because the facts simply refuse to fit the timeline. In the quiet archives of Greene County, Ohio, rests one such record. It details the official death of a man named Caesar Bowen in 1888 at the unsettlingly precise age of 126 years old. This places his birth year as 1762, a time when King George III reigned and Ohio was merely unmapped wilderness. This isn't just a claim of extreme longevity. It's a profound historical anomaly that scholars have preferred to ignore for over a century. 7 different notarized affidavits, signed by prominent citizens, swore he already looked ancient in their own childhoods. The county coroner noted, dental wear and bone density, inconsistent with any living person I've observed, yet refused to dispute the age. The real mystery wasn't just his age, it was what they discovered inside his cabin. 63 leather-bound journals, written in 3 distinctly different handwriting styles, all purportedly his own, suggested a life far stranger than simple long age. Before we delve further, let us know where you're tuning in from across the United States. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories like Caesar's deserve to be dragged out of the shadows. The question of how one man could genuinely witness the birth of a nation and the eventual dawn of the industrial age requires us to first understand his environment. Greene County, Ohio, in the 1880s, was a community built on a fierce abolitionist heritage. Caesar lived just 2 miles outside Xenia, in a remote cabin. He was a familiar, almost ghost-like figure, walking with a gnarled hickory cane he claimed to have cut in 1799. His skin was like heavily cracked, old leather, but everyone commented on his eyes, unnervingly clear, focusing with an intensity that made strong men look away. For 3 years, the town physician, Dr. Harold Sutton, tried to examine Caesar. The doctor was medically stumped. His patient's pulse was barely 40 beats per minute. His vitals impossible. A manumission document from 1826 freed Caesar, Negro man, aged approximately 64 years, confirming his birth in the early 1760s. Caesar's own testimony painted an even more extraordinary picture. He claimed to remember the Stamp Act riots and being a boy when Pontiac's rebellion raged. I was born on a tobacco farm in Tidewater, Virginia, he told reporter Thomas Fletcher in 1885. I saw empires fall and rise. I saw slavery spread like a sickness across this land, and I saw it finally die. I witnessed things that would break your mind if I described them properly. But the strangest thing, Caesar confessed, is that I remember all of it. Every face, every voice, every moment of suffering and brief joy. They accumulate like stones in your chest. In the spring of 1887, Caesar began to visibly decline. Then, on October 12th, 1887, while speaking with a neighbor, Caesar abruptly stopped. His expression shifted as if he suddenly remembered something terrible, and he became completely mute. He began suffering from episodes of temporal confusion, staring at blank walls with profound terror. Local children whispered that he was counting down to some unseen conclusion. The crisis arrived in January 1888 when he collapsed outside his cabin, burning with a fever. When the fever broke, Caesar spoke his first words in 3 months. "I should have died with the others. On the crossing, that's when it should have ended." He was speaking of the Middle Passage. "I never made that crossing. So why do I remember it? Why do I remember Africa, Dr. Sutton? I've never been to Africa. I think," Caesar said slowly, "that I am carrying the weight of more than one life. The memories and years of others have been added to my own. I am both blessed and cursed to bear witness." He spoke of an old African woman who, through a ritual when he was a child, had chosen him to carry the weight of your people. He spoke of absorbing the experiences of other slaves he encountered, becoming a living archive of testimonies that would otherwise have been erased. As winter gave way to spring, Caesar's mind sharpened. "Time is finally catching up to me," he said. "All those borrowed years, all those memories that don't belong to me, they're coming due. I need to know when it will happen so I can prepare." Confirmation arrived with reporter Fletcher, who brought letters from readers. These letters provided chilling historical verification. Caesar had been recognized as a slave in Virginia in the 1790s, run away from a different owner in 1808, and was described by an Underground Railroad conductor in 1823 as appearing ancient, though he claimed to be 61. "My body ages, yes," Caesar admitted, "but not at the rate it should. Time passes through me differently." When they examined the 63 journals, they found them filled with dated entries recording the suffering and resistance of dozens of other slaves' testimonies that preserved names, dates, and harrowing details that defied the limits of one man's life. "I realized I had been given a terrible gift," Caesar explained. "The time to witness, the ability to record, and the necessity to remember. In early May 1888, the fragmentation began. The neighbor noticed Caesar's skin becoming translucent, his eyes turning gray like old glass. "I can feel myself becoming less solid, less present," Caesar whispered. On Maitre Seredi, he sat rigid in his chair, soting that. "All of them are here surrounding me, and they want their time back." He cycled through dozens of personas, speaking in the Gula dialect, the softer drawl of Virginia, and a chorus of unknown languages. "I'm becoming everyone I've ever carried, and in the process, I'm ceasing to be anyone at all." Suddenly, the chaos ceased. Caesar looked at the men with serene clarity. "I understand now," he said. "This was never about me living one impossibly long life. She made me a vessel. Every slave I encountered who died too young, their memories, their years, their witness, were preserved in me. The ritual that bound them to me is complete. The debt is settled." He smiled, a look of profound relief. "I can feel all those borrowed years releasing their hold. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel light. It's finally time for me to die." Caesar lived 7 more days in a peaceful, lucid decline. He asked to be moved outside to sit under an old oak tree. "I had forgotten how beautiful the world could be when you were you and carrying the weight of so much sorrow," he said. "It's extraordinary." On the morning of May 15th, 1888, A woke early. He made Dr. Sutton promise that the journals would be preserved, that the stories they contained deserve to be known. "I'm ready now," he said softly. "I've carried the burden I was meant to carry, and now I can lay it down. Just stay. Don't let me die alone." At 2:47 p.m., Caesar Bowen took his last, gentle breath. The county coroner, Dr. William Hayes, who examined the body, found every physical indicator suggesting extreme HFAR, exceeding normal human parameters. "If someone told me this body was 150 years old," he admitted, "I couldn't contradict them based on the evidence." Caesar was buried 2 days later in the Woodland Cemetery in Xenia. His gravestone, simple but dignified, reads, "Caesar Bowen, 1762 to 1888. He remembered. The 63 journals were transported to Dr. Sutton's home. He spent the remaining 15 years of his life studying them, finding historical verification for every specific claim. In 1895, he published his book, The Extended Witness, which was dismissed by the scientific community as a dangerous deviation from scientific rigor. Critics argued it was an elaborate fraud, but Dr. Sutton never wavered. "I know what I witnessed," he wrote in his final journal entry. "I believe that in seeking to understand Caesar, we must be willing to consider that consciousness, memory, and human experience are far more complex and mysterious than our current science acknowledges." The journals were eventually donated to the Ohio Historical Society. It wasn't until the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement, that historians began to appreciate their extraordinary value. They remain the most comprehensive first-person account of the African-American slave experience across multiple states and multiple decades. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a historian who studied them, wrote, "Whether Caesar Bowen actually lived for 126 years is perhaps less important than what his journals represent. He succeeded in preserving testimonies that would otherwise have been lost. The question of how Caesar lived so long remains officially unanswered. Skeptics call it a hoax. Perhaps ecologists cite it as evidence of collective memory. Neuroscientists admit we still don't fully understand consciousness. What is certain is that Caesar Bowen existed. What is certain is that he left behind 63 journals, filled with detailed testimonies. What is certain is that he dedicated his impossible life to ensuring that suffering would be remembered and resistance would be honored. In Greene County, locals still speak of the old man who remembered everything. His cabin, which stood for another 40 years, was demolished in 1928. Workers claimed they heard old songs in unknown languages as the final boards were pulled away. The land where the cabin stood remained empty for decades, unable to sustain life. A final, silent witness. Perhaps the most important question is not how he lived so long, but what he chose to do with that extended existence. He chose to remember, to record, to bear witness. He chose to make his impossible life a repository for stories that history would have otherwise erased entirely. That is the true, haunting legacy of Caesar Bowen. Not the impossible span of his years, but the depth of his commitment to honoring the lives of people who history would have otherwise forgotten. This mystery reminds us that sometimes the greatest legacy is simply the commitment to ensuring that truth survives, that suffering is acknowledged, and that the dead are not forgotten. What do you think of this story? Do you believe it was possible for one man to live so long? Or was there a more rational explanation we've yet to discover? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more incredible stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves deep mysteries.